My name is Elena Marrow, and I learned the sound of loneliness long before I ever learned how to name it. It sounds like a refrigerator humming at 3 in the morning. Like footsteps in the apartment above yours that never come down the stairs to knock on your door, like your own breath echoing back at you when you say something out loud just to prove you still can. I used to think I was good at being alone. I told myself it was a strength, something sharp and clean that I'd honed over time. I said I preferred it this way. I said silence helped me think. I said space helped me heal. What I didn't say, what I didn't let myself think, was that I had simply grown tired of being disappointed by the weight of other people's absence. Being alone felt easier than hoping someone might stay. That night began like so many others, unremarkable, colorless, wrapped in the soft exhaustion of a life lived carefully. Rain slid down the windows in thin, wavering lines, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of amber and red. My apartment was dim, lit only by the weak glow of a lamp in the corner and the streetlight bleeding in through the blinds. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, holding a mug I'd reheated twice already without drinking. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I remember staring at the sink, at a single plate left unwashed, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once, about how quiet the room was, about how my shoulders never seemed to relax anymore, about how, even on nights when I told myself I was fine, something in my chest always felt unfinished. Then I felt it. Warmth. Not the imagined kind, the kind you talk yourself into when you miss something you can't have, but real warmth. Solid. Immediate. Pressed gently against the back of my right leg, just below the knee. Not sudden, not startling, just there. My body froze before my mind could catch up. Every muscle tightened, my breath locking halfway between inhale and exhale. The mug slipped slightly in my hands, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim, but I didn't notice. My entire awareness narrowed to that single point of contact. Heat, steady, alive. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because turning around would mean acknowledging that something had crossed the carefully maintained boundary of my solitude. Turning around would mean letting the moment become real. And real things, I had learned, come with consequences. I stood there, staring at the sink, listening to the rain and my own heartbeat, trying to explain the sensation away. Maybe I'd leaned too close to the stove earlier. Maybe my nerves were misfiring. Maybe grief, left unattended for too long, had finally decided to manifest as touch. The warmth shifted slightly, pressing closer. A breath soft, unmistakable brushed against the fabric of my jeans. My throat tightened. Slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile equilibrium the moment was balancing on, I set the mug down on the counter. My hands were trembling now. I could feel it, the fine vibration running through my fingers, my wrists, my arms. I pressed my palms flat against the cool laminate, grounding myself in the contrast. Still, I didn't turn. Another breath, warmer this time, followed by a faint sound low, almost inaudible. Not a growl, not a whine, something softer, a presence without demand. I told myself I wasn't afraid. That was a lie. Fear doesn't always announce itself as panic. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, as the certainty that if you move, something important will be lost. I counted to 3. On 2, my heart stuttered. On 3, I turned. He was sitting behind me like he had always been there. A dog medium-sized, sturdy, his coat a deep, uneven brown that caught the low light and held it. His fur looked rough at first glance, but when I would later touch it, I'd realize it was softened by time, by weather, by living. One ear stood alert while the other folded slightly at the tip, giving him a perpetually thoughtful expression. His eyes were dark, steady, and far too calm for a creature who had apparently materialized out of nowhere. We stared at each other. I expected chaos. Barking, movement, some sudden, violent proof that this was a mistake or a threat. Instead, there was only quiet. He didn't rise, he didn't retreat. He simply watched me, his gaze level and patient, like he was waiting for me to decide what kind of moment this would become. What? My voice cracked, the word falling apart before it could take shape. His tail thumped once against the floor. The sound was small, ordinary, and somehow, it undid me. I sank down onto the tile, my back sliding against the cabinet until I was sitting on the floor in front of him. The cold bit into my skin, sharp and grounding. My chest felt too tight, my breath shallow and uneven, but I couldn't look away. "Where did you come from?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. He tilted his head, the uneven ear tipping forward, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The rain, the light, the quiet understanding that something had shifted. I reached out before I could overthink it. My hand hovered inches from his chest. My fingers curled slightly, ready to pull back at the first sign of fear or aggression. He didn't flinch, didn't bare his teeth or pull away. He leaned forward just enough that my fingertips brushed his fur. Warm, solid, real. The sensation traveled through me like a shockwave. I laughed a short, breathless sound that startled us both. His eyes widened briefly, then softened again, his tail thumping a little harder this time. "Okay?" I breathed. "Okay?" I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I didn't know that this moment would redraw the boundaries of my life. All I knew was that I was no longer alone in my kitchen, and the silence no longer sounded empty. I spent that first hour on the floor with him. I didn't move him. Didn't try to guide him anywhere. We simply existed together, the distance between us shrinking in cautious increments. Eventually, he stood and circled once before sitting closer, his side brushing my knee. I felt the warmth again, stronger now, undeniable. Something in my chest loosened. I checked for a collar. There was none. His fur was clean but worn, his body bearing the subtle marks of a life lived outdoors, tiny scars hidden beneath his coat, a stiffness in one hind leg when he shifted his weight. He wasn't malnourished. He wasn't frantic. He looked like a dog who had learned how to endure. So had I. When I finally stood, my legs stiff and numb, he rose with me, matching my movement as if we were tethered by something invisible. I filled a bowl with water, setting it down carefully. He waited until I stepped back before drinking, his restraint both reassuring and heartbreaking. "You can stay," I said quietly, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to settle him. "For now." He looked up at me, water dripping from his muzzle, and in his gaze was something I didn't yet have language for. Not gratitude, not relief, something steadier. Recognition. That night, he followed me through the apartment, never underfoot, never distant. When I sat on the couch, he lay on the floor beside it, his back pressed against the base like an anchor. When I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, I felt a hesitation ripple through him. "It's okay," I murmured into the darkness. "You can come." He didn't climb onto the bed. He didn't need to. He lay down behind it, close enough that I could feel his warmth radiating through the thin frame, close enough that when I shifted, he shifted too. I lay awake for hours. I listened to his breathing slow, rhythmic, untroubled. I counted the seconds between each rise and fall of his chest. My mind raced, cataloging all the ways this could go wrong. Someone could be looking for him. He could be dangerous. I could be making a mistake that would cost me more than I was prepared to lose. And yet, when sleep finally came, it was deeper than any I'd had in years. Morning light crept into the room, pale and hesitant. For a moment, I forgot. I stretched, my body heavy with unfamiliar rest, and then I felt it again, that steady warmth behind me. I turned this time without fear. He was still there, curled into himself, his head resting on his paws, one eye cracking open as I moved. His tail thumped weakly, once, and then stilled. "Good morning," I whispered. The word felt strange on my tongue, like a greeting meant for someone else's life. I made coffee. I found an old bowl and filled it with food, scavenged from the back of the pantry rice, some leftover chicken I'd planned to throw out. He ate slowly, methodically, as if savoring not just the meal but the safety of it. As the day unfolded, reality began to press in. I took pictures. I checked community boards online. I scanned lost pet listings with a growing knot in my stomach. Each time I refreshed the page and saw nothing that matched him, a conflicted relief settled over me. I walked him around the block, a makeshift leash fashioned from a scarf. He stayed close, his body aligned with mine, his attention flicking between the world and me. People passed us, nodding, smiling. One woman commented on how calm he was. I smiled back, unsure how to explain that calm recognizes calm, that broken things sometimes fit together better than whole ones. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the apartment filled with shadow, I sat on the couch and let the day wash over me. He settled behind me, his back pressed against mine. his warmth seeping into the places I hadn't realized were cold. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, the quiet felt full. For the first time in a long while, the quiet felt full. It didn't echo back at me. It didn't mock me with the absence of something I couldn't name. It simply existed, dense and breathable, wrapping itself around the two of us like a held breath that no longer needed to be released. I sat there for a long time, the city outside slipping from evening into night without asking my permission. Streetlights blinked on one by one, their glow stretching across the living room floor in soft, uneven bands. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped and died. Somewhere above me, someone laughed, the sound muffled through concrete and distance. All of it felt strangely distant, like I was watching the world through glass, while something far more important anchored me exactly where I was. His back was pressed to mine. Not heavy, not demanding, just enough to remind me that if I leaned, there would be something there. I let my head fall back against the couch cushion and closed my eyes. The warmth seeped into me slowly, like sunlight through a closed window. I could feel the rise and fall of his breathing, steady and untroubled, and without thinking, I matched it. In, out, in, out. The knot I carried beneath my ribs loosened, fraction by fraction, until my shoulders finally dropped from where they'd been braced for years. I didn't realize how long I'd been holding myself together until I felt what it was like to stop. That night became our first ritual without either of us meaning it to. I stayed on the couch, curled sideways, my feet tucked beneath me. He shifted occasionally, adjusting his weight, always careful not to break contact completely. Every time he moved, I flinched, some old reflex warning me not to expect permanence. And every time he settled again, his warmth returning like a quiet apology for a fear he didn't understand. When sleep took me, it did so gently. I dreamed of water. Not drowning, not panic, but standing knee-deep in a river, the current strong but manageable, my feet planted firmly against the pull. In the dream, I wasn't alone. Something solid stood beside me, anchoring me, sharing the resistance. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. The way you feel someone's presence even with your eyes closed. I woke just before dawn. The room was dim and blue, the kind of light that belongs only to early morning. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, afraid that movement would dissolve whatever fragile miracle the night had given me. My senses sharpened, cataloging the room, the sounds, the familiar and unfamiliar contours of my life. Then I felt him shift behind me, a soft exhale, a subtle stretch, the brush of fur against fabric. Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. I turned my head, peering over the back of the couch. He was still there, his chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. When he noticed me watching, his tail thumped once against the floor, slow and restrained, like he didn't want to disturb the moment. "Hey," I whispered. The word felt intimate in a way I wasn't used to. I pushed myself upright carefully, my joints stiff from sleeping in a position I wasn't meant to. He rose with me, stretching each leg deliberately, a soft grunt escaping him as he worked the tension from his body. I watched him with an attentiveness that surprised me, noting the way he favored one hind leg, the slight hitch in his movement that suggested an old injury. "Does that hurt?" I murmured, though I knew he couldn't answer. He looked at me, ears flicking, and then stepped closer, nudging my hand with his nose. The gesture was gentle but purposeful, like he was redirecting my attention away from worry and back to what was in front of me. I smiled despite myself. The day unfolded slowly, cautiously, like neither of us wanted to rush whatever this was becoming. I moved through my apartment with a heightened awareness, noticing things I'd stopped seeing years ago, the thin crack in the wall near the window, the faded photograph on the fridge I'd never bothered to replace, the way the floorboard by the bedroom door always creaked underfoot. He followed me at a respectful distance, close enough that I never felt alone, far enough that I didn't feel crowded. When I showered, he lay just outside the bathroom door. I could see his shadow through the frosted glass, a quiet sentinel. The sound of the water usually made my thoughts spiral, the white noise dredging up memories I preferred buried. This time, it was different. The knowledge that I wasn't the only living thing in the apartment grounded me, pulled me back to the present whenever my mind threatened to drift. Afterward, I made us both breakfast. Properly, this time. I found a bag of dog food at the back of a cupboard left by a previous tenant expired, but not by much, and mixed it with fresh chicken and rice. He watched me from the kitchen doorway, his posture attentive but patient, as if he trusted that I would eventually figure out what he needed. "You're very calm for someone who broke into my life," I told him lightly, setting the bowl down. He sniffed it, glanced up at me once, then ate. I drank my coffee standing at the counter, watching him, my mind drifting through possibilities. I should take him to a vet. I should check for a microchip. I should do the responsible thing. Each thought came with a sharp edge of fear that someone would claim him, fear that I'd be told he wasn't mine to keep, fear that this warmth would be taken from me just as suddenly as it had arrived. I tried not to cling to him. But clinging isn't always loud or desperate. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like memorizing the sound of another being's breathing, just in case you never hear it again. When I finally gathered the courage to leave the apartment, he waited by the door, tail low but wagging, eyes fixed on me like he was checking for cues. I hesitated, hand on the knob, suddenly acutely aware of how fragile this arrangement was. "You'll come back, right?" I said softly, more to myself than to him. He sat, not because I'd trained him to, not because he understood the words. He just sat, calm and steady, like he was telling me that some things don't require reassurance. I exhaled, unlocked the door, and stepped into the hallway. He followed. The building smelled like old paint and dust, the familiar sense of shared living spaces. He moved beside me, his shoulder brushing my leg occasionally as if to check that I was still there. When we reached the stairwell, he paused, ears flicking at the sounds echoing from below. I waited, letting him decide the pace. Together, we descended. Outside, the city was waking up. Early commuters hurried past, eyes down, earbuds in. A delivery truck rumbled by, the driver sipping coffee from a paper cup. The sky was pale and overcast, the promise of rain lingering in the air. He took it all in with quiet interest, his nose working overtime, his body alert but unafraid. We walked without destination. Around the block. Past the park I usually avoided because it reminded me of things I didn't have. Past the cafe where I'd once sat for hours pretending to read while watching other people live their lives. With him at my side, the world felt less hostile, less overwhelming. It didn't demand anything from me beyond the next step. People noticed him. They always do, I would learn. Dogs draw attention in a way humans rarely can. A woman jogging slowed to a walk to smile at him. A man waiting for the bus nodded approvingly. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed, whispering something I couldn't hear. "Is he friendly?" someone asked. "Yes," I replied automatically, surprised by the certainty in my voice. And he was. Friendly without being needy, present without being invasive. He allowed strangers to approach, to pet him, to exist in his space. But he never lost track of me. Every few moments, his gaze flicked back to mine, checking in, recalibrating. It felt mutual. Back at the apartment, I wiped his paws with a towel, the act intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. He let me, lifting each paw when I touched it, his trust offered freely. When I was done, he shook himself and trotted into the living room, settling behind the couch like it was his designated place. I laughed softly. "Of course," I said. "You found your spot." The rest of the day passed in small, meaningful increments. I worked from home, my laptop balanced on my knees, my concentration better than it had been in months. Every time my thoughts wandered too far down old, dark paths, I felt the steady presence behind me, the reminder that I was here, now, with someone who needed me to stay that way. In the afternoon, I made calls. Not to shelters. Not yet. To a veterinarian. I scheduled an appointment under my name, my voice steady even as my heart raced. When I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the wall, bracing myself for whatever came next. He sensed the shift. He always did. He stood and moved closer, resting his chin on my knee, his eyes searching my face. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, my fingers threading through his fur. The contact grounded me, pulled me back from the edge of my own thoughts. "It's okay," I told him, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. "We're just checking things out." His tail wagged once, slow and reassuring. That night, the fear crept in again. It always does when the lights go out. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around me. He lay on the floor beside the bed, close enough that I could feel his warmth radiating upward. Every so often, he shifted, the sound of his movement cutting through the quiet. My mind filled the darkness with questions I refused to ask out loud. How long will this last? What happens when someone comes for him? What happens when I lose this? My chest tightened, my breath growing shallow. I curled onto my side, facing the edge of the bed, my back exposed to the room. I hated sleeping that way. It made me feel vulnerable, unprotected. Tonight, I didn't have the energy to turn back. Then I felt it. The bed dipped slightly behind me. I sucked in a breath, my body tensing. But before panic could take hold, warmth pressed against my back. Solid. Familiar. A careful weight settled at my spine, his body aligned with mine, his presence unmistakable. He had climbed onto the bed. Not fully, not sprawled or intrusive, just enough that his chest pressed gently against my back, his head resting near my shoulder blades. He was careful, deliberate, like he understood this was new territory. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Tears slid silently down my face, soaking into the pillow, my body shaking with an emotion too big to name. I pressed my hands together, knuckles white, afraid that if I reached back, the moment would break. He adjusted slightly, his warmth increasing, his breath steady against my shoulder. I let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "It's okay," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You can stay." He stayed. Sleep came in waves, shallow at first, then deeper, until I drifted under completely, anchored by the quiet certainty of another heartbeat behind me. The vet visit the next day loomed over me like a storm cloud. I prepared for it with the same meticulous care I used to prepare for everything important lists, contingencies, emotional barricades. I told myself it was just information. I told myself knowledge was power. I told myself I could handle whatever came. He rode in the passenger seat, secured with a borrowed harness, his head resting on the console between us. Every time I glanced at him, he looked back, calm and trusting, as if this was just another adventure we were taking together. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and anxiety. He sat beside me, pressed against my leg, his body warm and solid. Dogs barked intermittently, cats meowed from carriers, the air thick with nervous energy. My knee bounced uncontrollably, my fingers digging into his fur like an anchor. When the vet called us in, I stood on legs that felt too weak to hold me. The examination was thorough but gentle. He tolerated it with quiet dignity, only flinching once when the vet manipulated his hind leg a little too firmly. My heart clenched, my protective instincts flaring. "Old injury," the vet said thoughtfully. "Healed, but it probably still aches sometimes." I nodded, my throat tight. No microchip. No immediate red flags. "Looks like he's been on his own for a while," she added. "But he's in good shape. You've been taking care of him." The words hit me harder than I expected. I have. When we left, the air outside felt brighter, lighter, like the world had shifted just enough to let me breathe. I knelt on the sidewalk, my hands on his shoulders, my forehead resting briefly against his. "Okay," I whispered, a smile breaking through my tears. "Okay." That night, back in the apartment, he settled behind me on the couch like always. The warmth pressed into my back. Familiar now, expected. I leaned into it this time. Not because I wasn't afraid of losing it, but because I was finally learning that some things are worth feeling, even if they don't last forever. But because I was finally learning that some things are worth feeling, even if they don't last forever. That realization didn't arrive like a revelation. It didn't crash into me with cinematic clarity or wrap itself in certainty. It settled instead slow and careful into the spaces Ash had already begun to soften. It was there in the way I leaned back against him without flinching, in the way my body stopped bracing for disappearance every time he shifted his weight. It was there in the quiet acceptance that love, even the kind that arrives without warning, is not diminished by its impermanence. The evening stretched on, unhurried. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, a low, constant thrum that had once made me feel invisible. Now it felt like background music to something more intimate, unfolding within these four walls. I could feel Ash breathing behind me, his chest expanding and contracting against my back, his warmth a steady presence that grounded me in the present moment. I let my head rest against the couch cushion and closed my eyes. For the first time since he had appeared in my kitchen like a quiet miracle, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't immediately defined by loss. Not a grand one, not a dramatic one, just a series of small, ordinary moments strung together by choice. Morning walks, shared silence, the comfort of knowing that when I turned around, someone would be there. That night, I slept deeply again, my dreams untroubled. When I woke, Ash was still behind me, his body curved protectively along my spine. The sunlight filtering through the blinds painted thin gold lines across the room, catching in the dust motes that floated lazily in the air. I lay there, breathing him in, memorizing the feel of this moment. Life didn't transform overnight, it never does, but it shifted, subtly and irrevocably, the way a river changes course over time. Days began to arrange themselves around Ash's needs, and in doing so, they gave shape to my own. We developed routines that felt less like obligations and more like anchors. Mornings started with walks before the city fully woke, the air cool and quiet. Ash moved beside me, his pace steady, his attention divided between the world and me. Afternoons were spent working with him, curled at my feet or stretched behind my chair, his presence a constant reassurance. Evenings brought long stretches of silence that no longer felt empty, filled instead with the soft sounds of his breathing, the occasional thump of his tail, the distant murmur of traffic. People noticed the change in me before I fully did. A coworker commented on my smile during a video call. A neighbor lingered longer in conversation than usual, her eyes warm and curious. Even my reflection in the mirror seemed different, softer, less guarded. Ash noticed too. He became attuned to my moods with an accuracy that sometimes startled me. On days when my chest felt tight with unspoken worry, he stayed closer. His body pressed against mine, like a reminder that I wasn't facing anything alone. On days when I felt lighter, more open, he gave me space, content to exist nearby without demanding attention. Our bond deepened in these quiet exchanges, built not on grand gestures but on mutual awareness. He learned my rhythms, I learned his. We communicated in glances, in shifts of posture, in the simple act of staying. There were moments when fear resurfaced, sharp and unexpected. A knock on the door would send my heart racing. A passing comment about missing dogs would tighten my chest. Each time, I had to remind myself to breathe, to stay present, to accept that certainty is an illusion we cling to in order to feel safe. One afternoon, weeks after Ash's arrival, I found a flyer taped to a lamppost near the park. Lost dog. The paper was weathered, the ink slightly faded. The description didn't match him exactly, but close enough that my pulse quickened. I stood there for a long time, reading and rereading the words, my mind spiraling through possibilities. This was it, I thought. This was the moment everything would change. Ash stood beside me, his body pressed lightly against my leg. He looked up at me, his eyes calm, trusting, unaware of the storm raging inside my chest. I tore the number from the bottom of the flyer and slipped it into my pocket. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ash lay behind me as usual, his warmth familiar and comforting, but my thoughts refused to settle. I stared into the darkness, the flyer's words replaying in my mind. I knew what the right thing was. I knew that if someone was looking for him, they deserved to know he was safe. I also knew what it would cost me. When morning came, I made the call. My voice shook as I explained, my words careful and measured. The person on the other end listened, asked questions, thanked me for reaching out. They described their dog, their voice thick with emotion. It wasn't him. The relief hit me like a wave, leaving me breathless and unsteady. I hung up the phone and sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. Ash climbed up beside me without hesitation, his body pressing into my side, his head resting against my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around him then, holding him close, my face buried in his fur. He didn't pull away. He didn't resist. He simply stayed, his warmth enveloping me, his presence a silent reassurance. "I'm here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to reassure. Time passed. Seasons shifted subtly, the air growing cooler, the light changing. Ash's coat thickened as autumn approached, his movements slowing slightly as his old injury flared on colder days. I adjusted our walks, our routines, learning how to care for him as his needs evolved. In caring for him, I learned how to care for myself. I stopped skipping meals. I started sleeping regular hours. I let myself reach out to people again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Ash became a bridge between my solitary world and the one I'd kept at arm's length for so long. One evening, months after he first pressed his warmth against my leg in the kitchen, I found myself standing in the same spot, mug in hand, rain tapping against the window. The apartment looked different now lived in, softened by shared existence. Ash lay behind me, his body familiar and comforting. I felt the warmth. The memory of that first night surfaced, vivid and sharp. The fear, the uncertainty, the choice not to turn around. This time, I smiled. I turned, sinking down beside him on the floor, my back against the cabinet. He shifted closer, his head resting on my thigh, his eyes closing contentedly. "Do you remember when we met?" I murmured, my fingers tracing the familiar lines of his fur. "I didn't know what to do with you. I didn't know what to do with myself." He sighed, a deep, satisfied sound, his tail thumping softly against the tile. "I still don't," I admitted, "but I think that's okay." Life continued, as it always does, with its unpredictable rhythms and inevitable losses. There were days when the weight of the world pressed down on me, when old fears resurfaced and threatened to pull me back into isolation. On those days, Ash was there, his presence a steady reminder that connection doesn't erase pain, it makes it bearable. There were nights when I lay awake, listening to his breathing, my thoughts drifting toward the future, toward the knowledge that time moves forward whether we're ready or not, toward the understanding that one day, this warmth might not be there. The thought still hurt, but it no longer paralyzed me. Because I had learned something essential. Love is not a contract with permanence. It is a choice made in the present, again and again, despite uncertainty. The night everything crystallized into something like peace was quiet and unremarkable. Ash and I sat on the couch, the room lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. The city outside was hushed, the rain a distant memory. He lay behind me, as he always did, his warmth pressed into my back. I leaned into it, my body relaxing, my breath slowing. I felt grounded, present, whole in a way I hadn't known was possible. "My name is Elena Marrow," I whispered into the stillness, the words a declaration and a release. "And I am not alone." Ash's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and certain. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because I knew deep in my bones that whatever the future held, this moment was real. This connection was real. And that was enough. For now. For always. In the ways that matter.